Hi guys, my name is Mackenzie and I'm going to make this little video just about some plant care basics. I haven't been taking care of plants for a crazy long time. I still consider myself generally a beginner. Recently I've made more moves towards, more difficult plants, but I've really only been taking care of plants for about 4 or 5 months now. I have, as of today, 32 different houseplants, and they all kind of require different care. But this video in particular is going to be about just the basics of houseplants and how you can get into the houseplant hobby. So just a quick rundown, there's 5 things that you need to take into account when you are selecting a houseplant. So you want to consider the difficulty level of that plant. You want to think about what kind of soil you're using to plant it. You need to think about what type of container you're going to put it in and the material that that container is made out of. You need to consider where you're placing it in your home and the amount of light that it's getting wherever you put it. And then you need to consider how often you're watering it and how much water you're giving it. So with selecting a plant, you're gonna wanna do a little bit of research. I think some really good basic plants are pothos, which I have one right here, and she's getting really big. When I first got her, she was nowhere near this size. But pothos are super, super easy to take care of. Another really good beginner houseplant is a snake plant. I have another one right here. And ZZ plants, which this is a raven ZZ plant. So they're a little bit harder to find, but they're still super easy to take care of. And this is just a regular ZZ plant. But these are all super good beginner houseplants, as well as the pothos. Another really good easy plant to start out with are spider plants. They can survive pretty much anything. And they shoot out little babies all the time. So that would be another good one to start out with. I know some people say that succulents are good starter plants, but I have killed every single succulent I've ever owned. And personally, I don't like them. So maybe that's just me, but I think those can be a little bit trickier. I wouldn't suggest them, but maybe you're different. You want to make sure that you're not getting a houseplant that has more advanced needs as your first plant. I made that mistake. So I'll rewind a little bit. My first haul of houseplants, I got, I think, 4 plants, and it was a snake plant, a ZZ plant, a pothos, and a monstera. And monsteras are not hard to take care of, but for a beginner, I wouldn't recommend it as your first houseplant. It's difficult because they're really pretty and they're really trendy and everyone wants a monstera, but I would wait until you've been successful with a few easier plants before you take on something that requires even a slightly more care. Okay, so once you pick out whatever plant you want, you're going to want to think about how you're going to pot it. So as you can see, I think all the plants, well, no, there's one that's a little bit different. I'll get to that. But I suggest terracotta pots just because they're good moisture wicking pots. I think it's really tempting for people to want to put all of their plants in those super cute, like ceramic, painted, decorative pots that you see on Etsy or that you see in Target. But I didn't know this until I got really into my houseplant hobby, but that's actually really bad for your plant. Those are fine for like cacti or succulents, but for a houseplant that needs watering even semi-regularly, it's important that you put them in a pot that, one, helps with some of that moisture wicking so that the soil doesn't stay wet and rot the roots of your plant. And 2, has a drainage hole in the bottom. So you can see on the bottom, there's a little hole there. So that way, when you water it, the water will drain through. You don't want any water sitting there in that soil because that'll rot your plant's roots. And then that's really, really sad because your plant dies. Plastic pots can be okay too. So like I have my snake plant in a plastic pot. I think I have my parlor palm in a plastic pot as well. And it's not ideal. I pretty much only get plastic pots when I can't find any terracotta pots. But they'll survive, especially these 2, because they don't need a ton of water. And whenever I do water them, I just make sure that they drain fully before I put the bottom back on them. Just so that makes a little bit more sense. So with the plastic pot, there's this little bottom that can snap on and off. So hypothetically, you could just water it from the top, and then any excess water will catch in this little drainage tray and then you can dump it. However, I prefer watering them over the sink and then letting it leak out fully so that the water is no longer dripping from the bottom before I put this on there. So if you do have a decorative container that you like, for example, I got this little pot before I really knew what I was doing, and I think it's really pretty. It's like round and I don't know, I like it. I think it's pretty. However, it's not really a good idea to plant anything directly in this because as you can see on the bottom, there's no drainage holes. And if there's no drainage holes, then there's nowhere for that water to go. The water sits at the bottom of the pot and your plant's roots are gonna rot sitting in it. So with this one, I just left the plant in the nursery pot that it came in and sat it in here. That way I can take it to the sink. I pull it out of the pot, I take it to the sink, I water it. And then if any water, you know, I let it sit in the sink for a bit, but it's not the end of the world if it doesn't fully drain in the sink. Because if it drains into this pot, then I can just dump the water out and the plant doesn't need to sit with wet roots. Okay, so then that kind of leads into the type of soil that you put your plants in. So this was one of my biggest mistakes when I started my houseplant hobby, and I really wish someone would have warned me or I would have been able to, you know, research that more. Since then, I've researched this a ton because I ran into some big problems with my soil. But it's really important that you know what kind of soil your plant needs. So I thought you could just go to Lowe's, go to Home Depot, and buy like Miracle Grow all-purpose gardening soil. And that works fine for some plants, but a lot of plants are not going to like that at all. There's different mixes of soil that you might need. It really depends on the type of plant, but a good starting point is to make sure that you grab, you know, some all-purpose potting soil, but then also grab a bag of perlite and a bag of orchid mix or orchid bark, and then possibly some peat moss, because perlite, bark, all of those things are going to make your soil chunkier. So certain plants will need that so that they drain better. That soil will drain better, and your plant, you know, it all comes down to your plant doesn't want its roots to stay wet. So different soil mixtures will help different plants out with that. My big soil mistake that I made early on was I got this big, gorgeous Monstera, and I was super happy, and it was one of my first plants. And as I said before, that probably wasn't smart because I don't think I was equipped to care for her right away. I immediately repotted her, which in hindsight, I never would have done. A lot of times plants like to stay in their nursery pot up until they get too root bound, which means their roots get too big for the pot. when I got this Monstera, she was not root bound. She was happy in her nursery pot, and I uprooted her and I stuck her in a pot entirely made. It was just basic Lowe's all-purpose potting soil, super dense, retains moisture, and Monsteras hate that. Monsteras want a lot of perlite, they want a lot of orchid bark, they don't want just regular potting soil. And I did that, and she got root rot, and she's still recovering. I don't know if she's gonna make it, but that was a mistake that I made right away, where if I had researched more, I would have known to put her in a chunkier mix. So definitely research that before you repot your plant. You know, ask the person at the nursery what kind of soil they suggest, or you know, what mix they suggest. And it feels weird because you never think about that. As a non-plant person, I thought, you know, dirt is dirt, but that's definitely not the case. So then one of the other really important things to consider is where you're putting your plants. It can be hard to come to terms with, but there are some rooms in your house that you probably just won't be able to have plants. So if you have a room with no windows, or there's a window but like you're really close to your neighbor and the houses are like smushed together so it gets no sunlight, even a snake plant or a pothos or a ZZ plant, everyone says they're great low light plants, but remember that that's low light and not no light. They are living creatures. The sunlight is what helps them live and helps them grow. So they can't live without any of it. So just when you're placing them, make sure that you get a plant that's suited to the location and that it's getting at least some sunlight, even if it is a low level plant like this. I think too, sometimes I see all the time, I'll be reading about something and they'll say, oh, this plant does well in bright direct sunlight, bright indirect sunlight, medium light, or low light. And it can be hard to, you know, decipher what exactly people mean when they say that. So a good way to tell is by what direction your windows are facing. The most low light condition would be a north facing window. So if you have a north facing window, low light plants can survive in that room, or maybe a hardier medium light plant, if you sit it directly in the window, could tolerate that. But any plants that need medium to bright or bright light will not be able to live in a room with only a north facing window. West and east facing windows, both of them are great for medium light plants if you stick them directly in that window. You know, even if it's not directly, just somewhere close in front of that window. The highest amount of light that you're going to be getting is a south facing window. So all of the plants that require bright light, or you know, bright indirect light, they probably are going to need to be sitting close to a south facing window. So yeah, sometimes it's not super convenient, so you just kind of have to make it work. I know my east facing windows are getting really crowded just because I think the majority of plants, especially like prettier plants, are going to want medium to bright indirect light. And so east facing windows are great for that. So I have a lot of my plants kind of crowding those windows. So if you don't have a ton of space, I would suggest, you know, before you buy a plant, look up its needs in terms of light and figure out if you have somewhere to put it. So with water, I think a lot of people get really afraid that they're going to accidentally dry out their plants. But something that I've learned is that it's super, super hard to kill a plant by underwatering it. But it's really, really easy to kill your plant by overwatering it. So when in doubt, less water is better. You can always revive a plant if you've been underwatering it. But if you overwater your plant, it's, you know, likely that it will develop root rot, which is really hard to recover from. What I do when I'm watering, and there are some exceptions to this, but for all of my, 30-ish houseplants, they're all super happy with this method of watering. I pick them up and I take them over my sink, and then I just run the water over it. All my pots have drainage holes, so that's, a requirement to do it like this. But I run the water over it until the water begins to start streaming out of the drainage hole underneath. And then I let the pot sit in the sink, or I sit it on a drainage tray until it stops leaking. You want the water to stream through that hole so that any, excess bacteria, any like buildup of, just natural soil buildup gets rinsed out and keeps your soil nice and clean. When you're trying to figure out when to water it, you have to get your hands dirty to do this, but you stick your fingers in, and some plants want to be completely dried out before they're watered again. So for example, my snake plants need to be dry all the way through before they're comfortable being watered again. So I check that by, I stick my fingers in, like just all the way in, and wiggle it around. If I feel anything that's like wet or any type of moisture, then it's not ready to be watered. And then I do the same thing with the drainage holes at the bottom. I stick my finger in and I feel if there's anything that's even slightly moist, they're not ready to water. Other plants, like my pothos, only need to be dry, about 2 inches deep before they're rewatered. So it really depends on your plant. Again, I would ask wherever you're buying the plant, from the nursery or, just Google it online, what exactly their water care needs are. All right, I hope that this has been helpful for y'all. If you have any questions, or if you have any advice for me, or if you disagree about anything that I've said, like I said, I'm still relatively new to all of this, so my advice is just what's worked for me. Everyone has their own methods of, plant care. I would just, really research the type of plant that you get before you do anything like repotting or placing it in your home, just so that you don't kill it. All right, thank you. And like I said, leave me a comment or send me a message and let me know if you have any advice for me, or if you have any questions for me. And yeah, I hope you have a good day.